Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the Prime Minister for his speech. I note the Prime Minister did not address the 5 principles of the WP with regard to the reserves, but be that as it may, I have a few clarifications for the Prime Minister. The first point was the repetition of the point I think DPM Lawrence Wong made at last year's budget debate, which was on Mr. Loh Thia Kiang's view on the withdrawal of the reserves arising from actions taken by the government to deal with the global financial crisis. My response to DPM Wong at that time, if I recall, was different times call for different measures. And a good example manifesting that point is the fact that the PAP government is not returning the $40 billion back. So different times, different measures. But that said, I mean, I think I can understand the political urge to cherry pick what Mr. Loh says. I understand that. But Mr. Loh also has shared many views on the GST in this House. So I hope to hear the front bench quoting him on the GST in future. My second point is the more substantive issues that the Prime Minister raised. I think some are very helpful points. The first really takes off from the exchange I had with the Honourable Member, Mr. Neil Parekh, about a concern the Prime Minister raised about how the returns can be volatile. And I returned to the speech made by Finance Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam in 2015, and I quote, the NIR system, after it was modified in 2008, we paid particular attention to ensuring the system will be sustainable and that there is no bias in favor of over-optimism in expected returns, and thus the likelihood of facing a situation where actual returns are in fact much lower than expected returns. I'm not trying to be obtuse about the point, but I think it's important to understand the NIR framework. And if it is a conservative framework, then let's take it at that. Let's take it that it's a conservative framework. But what the Prime Minister is suggesting, that it may not be as conservative as Finance Minister Tharman suggested in 2015. So if the Prime Minister could clarify what is the position, because it will cause to turn anybody's view on how the NIRC ought to be used. Is it conservative or is it not conservative? The third point I'd like to raise is the point that, again, I had an exchange with the Leader of the House about land, and the Prime Minister put it as land is just a conversion. I made it clear to the Leader that I disagreed with how she had put the WP position. But again, it'll be helpful if the Prime Minister can share with this House if a single piece of land is sold repeatedly for as long as the lease lasts. How does that cohere with the Prime Minister's position that land is just a conversion? I think the Prime Minister will be right if we're talking about freehold land, but this is leasehold. So if the Prime Minister could explain, I'll be grateful. And if it means that we have to finesse or we have to correct ourselves, I don't think the WP will have a difficulty in doing that. On the IPS survey that the Prime Minister referred to, look, there are points that are made in there which suggest questions or serious questions as to expenditure funding going forward. At the same time, I don't dispute that there are also positions that participants took, be it in the pre-survey or post-survey, which show that they agree with the PAP government on certain issues. I don't dispute that.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank from the bottom of my heart the Leader of the Opposition for raising these questions and giving me the opportunity to clarify the matter further. First, on Mr. Loh Thia Kiang and the GST. Yes, indeed, he did regularly oppose the GST every time, introducing it at 3%, pushing it up from 3 to 5, which I did, going from 5 to 7, which Mr. Tharman did as Finance Minister. And we reminded the WP of this, only to be told by your ex-MP, Mr. Leon Pereira, that now that it has reached 7%, you don't oppose that, but you oppose going to 9. So Hansard is an open book. We can all refer to it readily. and soon we'll be able to do a generative AI search on it, and all these facts will come out, and I'm not hallucinating. Secondly, returns volatile to be reconciled with Tharman saying that the estimate is conservative. There's nothing to reconcile. It's true. The estimate is conservative, but it is an estimate. It's an estimate of a random variable, a variable which can be high, which can be low, which can be middling, which nobody knows which is going to be, but to the best of our judgment, this is the estimate of probably the middle point, the median or the mean or some measure, and therefore it gives some idea of the range of outcomes which are possible. And furthermore, it's an estimate for 20-year returns. Long term. In fact, GIC does it not just 20 years, but equilibrium returns, meaning assuming the world is in order and nobody is recovering from a slump or a crash or a depression or a mania bubble, everything is in order. Well, these are the returns, these are the rates at which we expect equities to pay back, to appreciate, bonds, cash, and so on. How much does that translate into next year's return? 5 years from now, 10 years from now? God only knows. It can be that you have 10 years, 15 years of bad markets. It happened in the 1970s and early 80s. It can be that you have 10 years of boom. It has happened. The tech bubble, and then more recently another bubble, maybe now an AI bubble to come. But it is a random variable, and we are trying to estimate what is going to happen, and we are trying to make a prudent judgment. So I'm not judging the tail, the most optimistic outcome, or the bottom, the most awful outcome, which is not just 0, but -10, -20. There could be a crash. But where do you think is a reasonable middling scenario? And that's the number which we will plan on and which we will use to draw on the reserves. And if it turns out that next year markets perform better, well, my reserves will grow, heng, happy. If it turns out that markets perform worse, I've already drawn the money, the reserves will go down, sharper. Can't be helped. I've already made that, spent the money. These are random outcomes. So I hope that that clarifies, and it will help the WP to make your explanations easier for us to understand. Land. Yes, you can sell it over and over again. You can't sell a freehold over and over again. You can sell leasehold over and over again. So if you sell a 30-year leasehold, I can sell the first 30 years now. I can sell another 30 years. I can't sell it. If I sell it now, I'll get very little money. I can sell it at the end of the first 30 years. I can sell another 30 years. At the end of that 30 years, I can sell, yes, another 30 years, and so on forever. So does that mean the leasehold is worth $1 plus $1 plus $1 plus $1 plus $1 forever? No. There's such a thing called an interest rate, a discount rate. And if you add all those payments together and discount them, you get the price of the land for freehold, at least in principle. And so if you sell the freehold land, it's one price. If you sell the 30-year lease, it's another price, it's shorter. But you're only selling that 30 years. And you get, in 30 years' time, you'll have the chance of selling it again and again. And if you add up all those 30-year lease earnings, well, that should get you the freehold value. So if you sell the land once and you want to spend the money now, you're actually saying, I used to own this land, I rent it out, I collect rent every month or every year. Over the next 30 years, I will collect rent every month. I can spend it every month. But now I sell the land, I collect 30 years of lease premium upfront, I spend it today. You are cheating. You can spend it over the next 30 years, as Ms. Hazel Pua suggests, is not an unthinkable proposition. You can put it away, you can invest it, spend the investment in returns, as we are doing, which is also sensible. But to say that you can take it forward and you can spend it and don't worry, because in 30 years' time I'll get it back. You tell your banker in 30 years' time I'll pay you back. Same dollar. I borrow $1 from you, in 30 years' time I'll give you back the Hong Bao. I see what he says to you.
Mr. Singh?
Mr. Speaker, with regard to the land point that the Prime Minister was referring to, I think the issue here is at the end of the 30-year lease, the money has to go back into the reserves once the land is sold. So it's the same piece of land that is sold. Every time it is sold, the land sale receipts go into the reserves. That's the only point I'm seeking confirmation from the Prime Minister.
Prime Minister?
Yes, of course. Every time I sell the land, I put money into the reserves. But I'm not putting the money into the reserves all today. I'm putting it in a stream of payments 30 years apart. And that means the money which you're paying in 30 years from now, today has to be discounted by whatever interest rate the bank is charging, multiplied by 30 years. It's not worth $1 for $1, maybe 10 cents for $1. And the next one after that, maybe 1 cent for $1. And the series converges.